August 12, 1945, southwestern Texas. The mess hall door swung open with a low creak. Dust hung in the amber light, slanting through cracked windows. A dozen American ranchers turned part-time guards stood aside as the prisoners shuffled in. Their uniforms hung loose on skeletal frames. Their cheeks were sunken, their eyes hollow. And yet there they were, walking ahead of the men who'd captured them. A cowboy with weathered hands and sun-cracked lips nodded toward the line of trembling Japanese women. "They eat first tonight," he said. Not as a gesture, as a decision. The room shifted. Forks paused mid-air. The prisoners froze. Before we continue, if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. These forgotten moments of humanity in the shadow of war deserve to be remembered. Your support helps us bring more untold stories like this to light. Now, let's continue. The women had been told they'd be starved, humiliated, maybe worse. Instead, American soldiers stood in line behind them, stew steamed in tin bowls, bread stacked high. A rancher tipped his hat at a woman who wouldn't meet his gaze. Another whispered to his companion, "Let them eat." One girl lifted her spoon with shaking fingers. No one stopped her. No one yelled. It wasn't paradise, not yet, but it also wasn't hell. And that was the most disorienting truth of all. Because in that moment, everything they'd been taught about the enemy began to crack like ice under spring sun. The trucks had arrived 3 hours earlier. Their engines coughed plumes of dust into the dry Texas air. The heat shimmered above the dirt road leading to the makeshift camp. Behind the rust-red barn, cattle lowed in slow, rhythmic waves. 12 Japanese women stepped down onto the gravel with bare feet and cracked lips. Their uniforms, once pressed and green, now hung in tatters. One woman clutched a ragged scarf to her chest, like armor. Another blinked hard against the sun as if it might strike her. A third, young, maybe 16, looked at the guards as though she expected a rifle to rise at any moment. But no rifles came, no shouts, no spitting, just stillness. The ranchers who greeted them wore hats stained with sweat and shirts rolled to the elbow. Most said nothing at all. One leaned against the corral fence, chewing a sliver of wheat. Another removed his hat and nodded stiffly. Their silence wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the kind of quiet that hung between men who had been told to expect monsters and found, instead, women who looked like they might collapse at any moment. A voice rose from the back, deep, rusted like a plow that hadn't seen oil in years. "They eat first tonight." It came from the foreman, an older cowboy with crow's feet carved deep into his face. No one argued, not the other guards, not the prisoners who didn't understand the words but understood the gesture. The line of men in uniform stepped aside. The women stood stunned. One looked to the others as if for permission. Another whispered something in Japanese, uncertain, disbelieving. The guard said it again, slower this time, a gesture, an open palm. "They eat first." They moved like shadows into the mess hall, feet dragging. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of stew. Thick, peppered, rich with oil. The women stopped just past the threshold. One gasped softly. It wasn't the barbed wire or the rifles that caught them off guard. It was the scent. Meat, vegetables, bread. After months of boiled weeds and rice stretched with bark, it was too much. One woman, older, trembling, pressed a hand to her mouth as her eyes welled. They were handed trays, no shouting, no slaps, just a metal plate and a ladle of steaming beef stew. The young girl, barely more than skin and bones, lifted her tray with both hands, as if it might float away. She moved toward the bench. Her steps were unsure, like someone walking through water. She sat. She stared. Her hands trembled around the spoon. The room was quiet, save for the creak of chairs and the clatter of utensils from the American line waiting behind them. One woman leaned in, sniffing the stew, as if it might be laced with poison. Another reached for the bread, then stopped. She waited for the blow, for the slap, for the guard to yank it away. Nothing happened. The young girl took the first bite slowly. The broth hit her tongue like fire. Salt, pepper, fat, and something she hadn't felt in weeks. Warmth. Her eyes went wide. She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth, then took another bite. And another. Her body shook, not from fear, but from the shock of remembering what food could be. Others followed. One woman wept silently into her stew, her shoulders heaving. A laugh cracked out from the far bench, short, brittle, quickly stifled. A guard looked over, but there was no punishment, only a shrug. And then the guard turned back to his own tray. Across the mess hall, the air settled into something unrecognizable. Not peace, not yet, but something like it. The kind of stillness that follows a long drought when the first raindrop hits dust, and nobody is quite sure whether to cheer or to cry. The women kept eating. They didn't speak. They didn't look up, and yet something had shifted. Not in the room, but in themselves. Something small, something dangerous. Because if the enemy feeds you first, if they wait in line behind you, if they serve you stew instead of scorn, then maybe everything else you were told might be a lie. Before the stew, before the truck, before Texas, there had been only fear. Not the kind that flashes in a moment, but the kind that builds like pressure in the lungs. In wartime Japan, fear was a way of life. The sky was something you watched not for clouds, but for bombers. Food was something rationed by the spoonful, and words like honor, loyalty, and sacrifice were served hotter than rice, ladled out in schoolyards and military drills like sacred truths. Yoshiko remembered those drills. She had been only 14 when she joined the Women's Auxiliary Battalion, a word that sounded strong but felt like surrender. Her uniform was stiff and far too big, her fingers raw from scrubbing blood from hospital floors. The officers spoke in clipped commands, eyes sharp, voices dull with repetition. Never be captured, they said. If you are, you will be shamed, used, torn apart. Some said it openly. Others let the rumors do the work. A girl from Osaka had once whispered in the barracks that Americans would skin prisoners alive. Another said they fed captives to pigs. It was nonsense. But they believed it because they had nothing else. Yoshiko had never seen an American. Only leaflets fluttering from the sky, filled with smiling white faces offering food, safety, words of peace. The instructors burned those flyers without reading them. Lies, they hissed. Traps. But the pictures lingered in her memory, too soft, too warm to match the warnings. She was told that death was preferable to surrender. They trained with that mantra whispered like prayer. She had been taught how to bind wounds, carry stretchers, ration morphine, but never how to ask for help, never how to survive if the empire fell, and then one day it did. The surrender came not as thunder, but as silence. The officers stopped barking orders. The wounded stopped arriving. Radios played strange music instead of victory updates, and then words spread like smoke. The Emperor had spoken, not through generals, not through myth, but through radio. Directly. His voice, delicate and far away, said they must endure the unendurable. No one moved. No one spoke. Some girls wept. Others simply sat down where they stood, staring at their hands like they no longer belonged to them. Yoshiko folded her blood-stiff apron and placed it gently on the edge of a cot. It felt like a funeral. They were rounded up days later, told they would be transferred, though no one said where. Trucks carried them to coastal encampments where they slept on dirt floors under tarps, ate watery broth from rusted cans. The guards had changed. They no longer barked either. They counted heads, checked rosters, remained quiet. The silence felt suspicious. Nothing was normal. Everything was uncertain. Then came the ships. The metal hulls loomed like mountains. Flying flags they had been told to hate. The boarding process was slow. One by one, the girls were led up the ramps. No beatings, no cages, just beds, actual beds stacked in rows. Thin mattresses, but clean. Yoshiko had braced for chains. Instead, she was given a blanket. The contradiction was unbearable. Below deck, the air was thick with salt and engine fumes. The bunks swayed gently. Some of the girls threw up from the motion. Others stayed awake all night, backs pressed to walls, whispering what might happen. Food trays came. Bread, meat. They stared at it like it might explode. One girl refused to eat. Another tried to hoard the bread under her cot. The fear was too deep. Nothing made sense. No one hurt them. No one touched them. The guards spoke little, offered water, and walked away. The Americans were faceless shadows, orderly, bored even, polite, and that was what frightened the women most, because cruelty could be resisted. But this quiet civility, it made them question everything. Yoshiko lay awake each night, her fingers gripping the cot's edge like it might vanish. In the dark, surrounded by the quiet breathing of strangers, she tried to hold on to the lie she'd been given. But every kindness cracked it wider. The truck rolled to a stop in a cloud of chalky dust. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to press on the skin. The doors creaked open with the slow groan of rusted hinges. The first girl stepped down into the heat of Texas. She was barefoot. Her feet touched the hot earth without flinching. Too calloused, too numb to feel it anymore. Her legs were thin as broomsticks, knees trembling under the weight of her own body. Behind her came the others, one by one, stepping off the truck like shadows. Some held on to the sides for balance. Others simply stumbled forward, their eyes scanning the ranch like they'd just been dropped onto another planet. The cowboys didn't speak at first. They stood in a loose line near the corral, rifles slung across their backs, hands resting on worn belts. Their faces didn't show anger, just something harder to name. One man took off his hat and let it hang in his hand. Another chewed his bottom lip, eyes darting from girl to girl, taking in the bones beneath their uniforms, the sunken cheeks, the shorn hair. One of the younger cowboys muttered under his breath, "These ain't soldiers." No one corrected him. One girl had a piece of rope tied around her waist to hold her uniform together. Another had wrapped her feet in strips of cloth, stained dark from blood and dust. A few scratched at their scalps without realizing it. Lice. Their skin was patchy from malnutrition. One looked no older than 13. The sight of them pulled the heat out of the air. The ranchers who had seen cattle torn open in winter storms, who had buried friends under sand and sky, shifted uncomfortably. They had expected prisoners. What they got were ghosts. The guards, less military than makeshift, gestured them forward. They were led past the barn, past the horses, toward the barracks. Not cages, not cells. Long, low buildings with wooden steps and tin roofs that clicked under the sun. The women paused at the doorway, not understanding. The lead guard, a man with a red bandana and sunburned cheeks, waved them inside. He said something in English they didn't catch, then pointed at the door. The hesitation hung thick. Then one stepped in, then another. Inside it smelled of wood and soap. Not much, but enough. Blankets folded on each bunk. Tin cups stacked on a shelf. A small stove in the corner. Cold for now, but there. One girl ran her fingers across a folded towel like it might disappear. Another stared at a bar of soap as if it were a relic dug from a forgotten world. When water was brought, cool and clear, in tin pails, they didn't drink it first. They watched the cowboys carefully. Waiting, always waiting. One girl whispered something in Japanese. The others turned toward her. She held the soap to her nose and smelled it. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened just a little. That night, the lights in the barracks flickered on as the sun dropped below the hills. The girls sat on the bunks without speaking. No one took off their clothes. No one cried. They just sat, backs straight, eyes unfocused. The blankets felt too soft, too clean. One girl laid down, then sat back up again, as if afraid the bed would vanish the moment she closed her eyes. Another flinched when a guard walked past the window, then blinked when nothing happened. No orders, no blows, just silence. Somewhere in the distance a harmonica played a slow, wandering tune that rose and fell like wind through wire. It slipped through the thin walls of the barracks and settled into the silence. A few of the women glanced at one another. The music didn't feel like war. It didn't feel like victory or punishment. It felt human, and that was the worst part. Fear was familiar. Fear had edges. But this softness, this quiet, hollowed something out inside them, a space once filled with certainty. Now, lying on cots with full bellies and blankets not yet stolen, that space only grew. When Yoshiko woke, the blanket was still there. Her fingers had clenched around the edge through the night. Small creases remained in the fabric. She loosened her grip slowly, half expecting a shout, a hand ripping it away, proof the kindness had been a mistake. But the room remained still. No boots, no orders. Just the breathing of the other women, heavy with sleep. The blanket was hers, clean in a way that felt deliberate. Someone had folded it, placed it carefully, like a gift. She traced the seam with her thumb. None of it made sense. Beside her cot sat the soap from the night before, unused. Next to it a rolled pair of socks. Thick. A toothbrush. A small comb missing teeth. These weren't luxuries, but to her they felt sacred. She washed that morning for the first time in weeks. The water was cold but clear. She scrubbed slowly, watching the grime lift from her skin like something shed. The soap smelled faintly of flowers, a scent from another life. Her reflection wavered in the basin. She couldn't tell if this was still war or some cruel dream. In the yard, the guard spoke quietly. No one shouted. A young cowboy with a sun-faded shirt handed a broom to one of the older women and nodded toward the porch. Another offered a bucket and pointed to the chicken coop. No threats, no force. Yoshiko watched a girl take the broom as if waiting for it to be yanked away. Another scattered grain for the hens, pausing to stare at their red combs and soft clucking. The chickens didn't know a war had ended. They only wanted to eat. Yoshiko took the bucket and followed the path to the coop. Her steps were careful. The chickens scattered, then regrouped. She crouched, set the feed down. One hen waddled closer. She reached out, not to grab, just to feel. Warm feathers. Living. She pulled her hand back quickly, startled by the ache in her chest. She was still an enemy that hadn't changed, but someone had given her socks. A blanket, not as a transaction, simply because she existed. That night she folded the blanket herself, smoothing it with the same precision she'd once used in hospital wards back home, preparing beds for dying soldiers. But this wasn't death. This was something else. Ownership had always been conditional. Everything belonged to the state, to the cause. But these things, this blanket, this comb, were hers. No one demanded them back. The absence of violence became its own language. She sat on the cot, arms around the folded fabric. Outside, a guard laughed. Low, ordinary. A radio wavered through a tune without drums or anthem. Yoshiko didn't smile, but she didn't flinch. And for the first time she allowed a forbidden thought. Maybe she mattered. The smell came before the sun. Rich, smoky, impossible. It slid through the barracks and into empty stomachs. Yoshiko sat up, heart racing. Meat, real meat. Hunger flared, guilt close behind. They lined up under a Texas sunrise. Trays waited. Eggs, toast, bacon shining with grease, coffee in tin mugs. Too generous. Too wrong. Yoshiko bit the bacon. Flavor bloomed, then burned. Back home, her brother starved. She lowered her fork. Around her, women stared. One cried while eating. This wasn't poison. It was mercy without explanation. Laughter broke out, fragile and strange. Days became routine. Chores, meals, evening walks unchained. Cowboys worked beside them. Hank taught Yoshiko to stitch leather, patient, trusting her with sharp tools. She wanted to hate him. He made it hard. Storms came. A guard brought blankets, unarmed. Warmth hurt more than cruelty. Months passed. News crackled of bombed cities. Earl turned the radio off. Enough. She left knowing she had been fed first by enemies, and that mercy reshaped her forever quietly.